events in the past. For those who see CIBEI seeks to promote education in diplomacy as a means of enhancing our in foreign policy, geopolitics, international cooperation, related files. In the next couple of minutes, we're going to at the end of the discussion. So if you can enter in the text receipt, or you can also raise your hand and we give you the opportunity to talk, or we can translate your question from Spanish to English. As well as to create wonderful connections between the academic sphere and diplomats in Colombia, Mexico, Peru. CIBEI, it's a remarkable connection and have influence with individuals around the world whose work has been on the contemporary international relations. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by Dr. Konstantin Sheiko to discuss the history of international relations. He started his academic career in the United States, graduating with a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts in International Relations from Alliant University. He did his PhD in History and International Relations at the University of Wollongong, Australia in 2004. He worked as a research assistant in the United States and as a lecturer, tutor in history, international relations and politics at the University of Wollongong for 15 years. During his time, he published several books, including 2 books on Russian historical revisionism with Ibidem, Verlag, and Columbia University Press. In 2017, he published a book in Paris of the Mind with Rowman Littlefield. So you can start
out. Here to the center and to Dr. Rodriguez for organizing this wonderful event. Now, before I begin, I would like to make a little introduction concerning the topic of our lecture today, the history of international relations. It sounds very daunting, my friends, because the topic is huge. It's broad and it's very complex. So I would like to make an apology to begin with, just in case if you're going to hear something that you already know and I'm going to repeat this knowledge, or just in case I'm not going to cover something that you have expected me to the table of contents. I was trying to keep it as simple as possible. So first we will deal with different definitional approaches. In our discipline, we're going to have a look at the historical origins of international relations as a discipline. We will briefly analyze World War I and World War II and their consequences. How did it impact on international relations? We'll have a look at literature and methodology, at different concepts, theories of international relations that are prevalent today. And finally, briefly, we're going to discuss the challenge of modernity, what we need to call for international relations today. And as usually, if we were having face-to-face conversation, I would have asked you to ask your questions as we go. But unfortunately, because of the digital format, we cannot do that. Also, before we begin, I wanted to say that I was planning to go to work to deliver this speech from my office at the High School of Economics, but our head of unit is sick with the COVID pandemic infection, unfortunately. So I'm delivering it from the corner of my own room, hiding from my son, who is very loud and So if you hear a child all of a sudden, guys, please ignore it. Okay, so please. Okay. International relations is the process of interaction between two or more nation states in the context of political, economic, or cultural relationships. However, this is a very vague formula, my friends. If we're going to have a look at the last component, cultural relationships, everything is more or less clear. However, if we talk about the economic realm, the interaction between states can be quite hostile. For example, those of you who are observing current US-Russian relations probably have noticed that Russia is suffering yet another round of Western-imposed economic sanctions. So actually the relation between two countries, the relations between two countries are quite strained, and a lot of people are talking about the new Cold War. And then if we talk about the first component, political relationships, it becomes even more complex. For example, if we look at the famous quote coined by Karl von Clausewitz, war is the continuation of politics by other means. And I have to say that modern nation states have engaged in a lot of warfare historically. It would be fair to say that international relations as a discipline was born from the perpetual conflict on the European continent, but also elsewhere. Just to give you a little bit of statistics, my friends, Russia is about 1,200 years old. She starts her history from 864, the arrival of a new dynasty from Scandinavia. And she has fought pretty much 50% of all the time that she has existed so far. And the United States, it's about 93% of all the time. Of all its historical time, the United States has been engaged at war. So out of 243 years, we're talking about 220 years of continuing out of the three. It is the politics, and sometimes it is the use of force. And this is what we're going to focus in our presentation on. So to begin with, I would also like to introduce the role of do not, however, non-state actors. So the age of non-state actors really began in the 20th century, and we're going to talk about it later in detail. However, at the very beginning, there were only state actors at the dawn of the international relations system. One important note here, to say that states are actors is to attribute them human quality and human-like behavior. So therefore, we assume that states behave as humans. And as we know, some humans sometimes act as bullies. So I think this is a very pertinent photo, which in a way describes the relationship, or the relations, I should say, between smaller nations and powerful nations. Quite often, for example, Russia's neighbors, especially during Russia's civilizational rise, feel the same how this little boy is feeling this picture, trying to stop something impossible. Well, I'm pretty sure that arranged when it comes to dealing with the United States. So what we're talking about, guys, is that we're looking at the anarchical state of affairs. We don't really have any rule made right. So bigger guys control the situation, stronger, militarily more capable, economically more potent. This is who dictated the agenda for a very long time. And I would like to bring right now the Wallerstein's model of world systems that I think very pertinently reflects, it elucidates the current state of affairs that we have in the world. So the countries are roughly grouped into three categories. So we have the core, we have semi-periphery, and we have the periphery. And the countries constantly, or the nations, should I say, constantly fluctuate in between these realms. So again, as an example, we can take the 20th century Russian history. At the start of the 20th century, the Russian Empire was on par with such nations as Germany, the UK, and the United States of America. However, in 1917, after the Russian Revolution, first she was thrown into semi-periphery and then she ended up in the periphery. And therefore, the new entity, the Soviet Union, had to claw its way into the core again. So this is the constant fluctuation that we have been observing in relation to Europe, my friends. So for the past 400 or 500 years, Europe has been the core of the world system, maintaining the rest of the planet in a semi-periphery or periphery status. How did Europe or the West, the collective West, manage to accomplish this task? I would like to expand Wallerstein's model very humbly and introduce a new dimension, which is called in the core or hegemony. So if we look at the West as a total entity, it has been staying as a core of the international relations system for the past 400 to 500 years, as I said. However, within the core, we constantly see changing actors. So let's say in the 1600s, the leading European power was Spain. However, then England took over. We saw the rise of France under Napoleon, and then we saw the rise of Germany twice and the challenges that Germany posed. So inside the inner core, we have a constant change of a hegemon. Okay, and the last hegemon of the Western civilizational model was the United States. And we'll talk about the Bretton Woods system in detail a little bit later. So at the same time, what is important to point out at the moment for you, young scholars of international relations, and those of you who are already accomplished in this field, is that the United States of America is the last, so to say, available Western hegemon. So what we're looking at, my friends, is the very pivotal, important, crucial time, the transfer from the unipolar model to multipolar model of world politics and international relations. And how is it going to go down? I'm not sure. So to continue, I have talked about history grounded in conflict. And indeed, Europe has been fighting since its inception. After the fall of Rome, we pretty much see non-stop warfare taking place on the European continent, with external forces invading once in a while. The Moors did. To illustrate this constant warfare, I would like to cite the words of one Russian Tsar. Tsar in Russian is a Caesar, so the Russian king, Alexei I Mikhailovich, who once said that if my princedom, my kingdom doesn't fight this year, this is not because we don't have the enemies, but because we're drawing our breath for our future conquests. And so if you look at the Russian history, my friends, you see that Russia has routinely been fighting on 2, 3, and sometimes 4 fronts per 1 year, fighting several opponents, sometimes 12. And that was characteristic for all European states. However, at some point, they fought a conflict that was too difficult to sustain. What I'm talking about is that that conflict brought the very existence of European civilization to the brink. And I'm not talking about the external invasion. I'm talking about Europeans fighting against each other. So now, if you allow me, I would like to make an attempt and conduct a little test. So please have a look at this slide. Choose one conflict which, in your opinion, became a foundation for the modern IR system. To do that, please use your smartphones and type in the address, which you can see above on the top of this page, polev.com/Konstantin SH063, and cast your vote. We'll take a minute here and wait. So let's see if the digitalization of our educational space has paid off. I'm really curious to see if this experiment is going to work. How is it going to work? Can you please try to cast your vote? Okay, here comes one. Please continue, my friends. Okay, okay. Have we finished? People are continuing to cast the votes. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we can stop here. No, nope, sorry. The votes are still being cast. So as you can see, the winner is 30 years war, and you're absolutely correct, my friends. By the way, 100-year war lasted for something like 113 years, but it wasn't that, but it was the 30 years war. Okay, just give me a second. I'm trying to leave. Okay. So this is 30 years war, my friends, and it was fought pretty much by all important nations of Europe except for Russia, and it was a welcome break for the Russian state. Some of the German regions, some regions was a huge demographic loss. Centuries for some of the German principalities to recover from this damage. And so the leaders of Europe decided to sit down and discuss the warfare. So a long time was, but they're very difficult to end. So as a result, the leaders of Europe sat together and they decided that they were not going with principles, and they created a bunch of nation states taking a legal action against one of them, one of their own, and saying, you cannot behave like this in the international arena any longer. Please know your space. Please cease your arbitrary conquests. By the way, at that time, Russia was trying to capture the Straits from Ottoman Turkey, so the city of Istanbul was going to become the third Russian capital, but it didn't happen. So the Treaty of Vienna, 1815, here you can see you can see the emergent architecture of the European continent. The Kingdom of Prussia, which would unify with other Germanic kingdoms, the Italian states, Austria, France, the Kingdom of Spain, all of them are more or less fitting their modern boundaries. So this is it for the Treaty of Vienna. And now we're going to talk about World War I, jumping forward pretty much 100 years. We're doing the same thing, please. Choose the reasons for World War I. Out of all the reasons presented for the start of World War I, please choose one. Take your time. This is it. Still, okay, still counting. Good. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. The votes are still being cast. So that was a trick question, my friends. I really need to apologize again. All of these reasons are valid reasons for World War I. I was just curious to see which one you're going to choose. The murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914 triggered the war, but there were so many other underlying causes. And so if you're interested, please Google causes or reasons for World War I, and you'll have probably like around 100 or 200 causes. It's the same with the fall of Rome, but I specifically ticked here the failure of European diplomacy because there was absolutely no reason for such a war to take place. In this respect, I would like to recommend you to watch a documentary called 37 Days, The Countdown to World War I. Immediately, I would like to warn you, there will be no action, but it's very well done. It's all based on real events and real dialogues, and it's going to show you the main actors in the international relations arena, how they desperately trying to stave off the looming conflict and how they fail, because all of them are still the interested they themselves represent people who are interested in the success of a certain nation state. So here you can see people being torn apart between their professional duty to the Russian, German, French, or English empire, and on the other hand, their duty to humanity. The war before World War I. So let's have a look at World War I and its consequences. First of all, the fall of all European mainland empires. Secondly, political isms became very fashionable. We see the emergence of the so-called ideologies. So there is no religion any longer present on the world stage, but we have fascism, socialism, communism, and Nazism running the stage. International relations finally became a full-fledged academic discipline after the First World War, seeing the formation of courses in the UK, the United States, and mainland Europe. So the world academia finally came to a realization that we needed to analyze all of these processes of interaction between different states to avoid another massacre. Tentative conclusions so far. So first of all, international relations is a Eurocentric phenomenon. I'm not going, obviously, to steal credit from other diplomatic or international relations efforts that have taken place since the dawn of time elsewhere in the world. However, as a coherent academic discipline, international relations emerged in Europe. So we're giving here the Europeans a credit. Secondly, it was born in conflict in order to mitigate and, if possible, to prevent such a conflict. Next, the knowledge of the world, regional and national histories, and the history of diplomacy is crucial for the aspiring international relations scholars. And international relations is a comparatively young discipline, but, my friends, it has been suffering under the pressure that actually emanates from the actors that we study, that is, from the state. The beginning of international relations, as you saw, was mired in a religious conflict. Later on, the nation state dominated the stage, dictating as to what principles were going to be enshrined in the international relations theory. So, for example, state sovereignty is the overarching principle of international relations. And moving into the 20th century, our discipline has been affected by ideologies, by Nazism, by fascism, by communism. So what I'm trying to say here is that we're jumping the hurdles constantly, where our academic discourse, our academic pursuit faces the necessities of the state, which is the actor, the state that we study. So there is a little bit of a paradox over here, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So very quickly, let us cover the interwar period, what was happening in 1918 to 1939. The Russian Revolution took place, the first proletarian or communist revolution in the world. So the whole class of bourgeoisie was exterminated in Russia, and all the means of production, according to Marx, went into the workers' hands, allegedly. We can talk about it in a separate lecture if an opportunity arises. Secondly, this is the beginning of the non-state actors, the dawn of non-state actors. The League of Nations was the first sizable experiment in 1920, but unfortunately, it didn't produce any tangible results simply because of the contradictions that I have already mentioned. So the League of Nations, as the IR creation, was already a hostage to the interests of competing states to begin with. The Great Depression in 1929 certainly didn't help. So we see the rise of Hitler's Germany very fast in the aftermath of the Great Depression, 1929, 1933. Hitler was already running Germany. 20th century is truly the age of nationalism, the age of ideologies and dictatorships, not just in Europe, but all over the world. So to continue, I have already mentioned the rise of Hitler's Germany. This is 1942, the rise of Hitler, and you see the farthest advance of Hitler's Germany and of Hitler's Europe, because all of Europe was under Nazi domination, toward the east. So pretty much all of Europe, geographic Europe, was under Hitler's command. And as this was transpiring, the world, other world leaders were already thinking about world's future. In Moscow, Stalin and his red generals envisaged the communist future for the whole world. So they had their own system of international relations intact. In the West, we see the leaders of Great Britain and the United States meeting up in August 1941 and signing the so-called Atlantic Charter, so creating the so-called Atlantic Partnership that still dominates the world. The Bretton Woods system was devised in July 1944, whereas all of the world currencies were pegged to the United States dollar. During the Yalta Conference in February 1945, the leaders of the big Troika means the big three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, divided Europe into respective spheres of influence. And as I said, the dawn of the non-state actor era continued to rise, and we see the UN, IMF, World Bank, later on NATO, and many other powerful non-state actors entering the stage. So this is the start of the Cold War. You see the divided Europe, my friends. And so the message that, the statement that I have already made holds true here. At that point, international relations system is being dominated by two competing ideologies, the so-called free world, led by the United States, and the communist world, led by the Soviet Union. In an attempt to analyze as to what is happening and has been happening in the realm of international relations, scholars have collected an amazing body of literature and created several competing schools in the realm of international relations. So the first school is the school of realism. It started a very long time ago with the writings of such authors as Nicholas Machiavelli in Florence and Thomas Hobbes, who was the UK author. Later on, Hans Morgenthau, with his Politics Among Nations, added to this scholarship in 1948. And I can also mention such scholars as George F. Cannon, who was the United States ambassador in Moscow, his long telegram on the policy of containment, and Reinhold Niebuhr. So what are the central tenets of the school of realism? First of all, we still continue to look at states as the central actors in international politics. We consider that the international political system is anarchic, as there is no supranational authority to enforce these rules. States act in their self-interest within the international system, but often violating the system, because states desire power to ensure self-preservation, and because states pursue national interests. The school of liberalism in international relations says that, no, guys, you're completely wrong. The use of force, the use of power is exactly what has brought about all of these troubles that we have been witnessing since time immemorial. The use of force is our Achilles' heel. What we need to do is work on the creation of international institutions that are going to play a key role in cooperation among states. So the argument here runs that having the proper institutions and diplomacy, states can work together to maximize prosperity and minimize conflict. The school of liberalism rejects power politics and introduces the soft power principle. Among thinkers, if we look to the past, obviously there are the figures of European Enlightenment, such as Voltaire, John Locke. We'll look at Immanuel Kant, modern era Robert Keohane, and Joseph Nye, who is the author of the soft power concept. So his book, The Means to Success in World Politics, I highly recommend you to read it. However, here I would like to make a stop and talk just a little bit about the soft power application in the modern world. According to Nye, neither Russia or China possess the elements of soft power in the international relations systems. The states, according to Nye, solely rely on the use of force. And he's completely right, because if you look at the civil institutions developed in the United States, they have gone far ahead in comparison to China and Russia. However, I would like to add that if, for example, you live in Russia, you don't see the American soft power whatsoever. What you see is the hard power, the sanctions, American bases, the enlargement of NATO, and so on and so forth. So here we have a very interesting paradox, my friends. We can have an example where there is a sprawling, well-developed, and even influential network of civil institutions and international institutions trying to play this role, cooperating among states. However, the superpowers' hard tactics, hard approach, hard power completely overshadows this approach. So there might be hundreds and hundreds of international organizations working in Russia at the moment, but we simply don't see the activity because Russia is being presented as the besieged fortress by the Russian media, and we're constantly talking about the emerging confrontation with the United States. Moreover, my friends, I would like to also point out, those of you who are observing the Russian-American relationships, that we still live in the world where we have checks and balances working. So, for example, President Biden said 2 weeks ago that Russia was America's existential threat, that President Putin was a killer, and that Russia was going to pay her price for meddling in the United States elections. And I can tell you, 100%, has it happened 200 years ago, we would have been at war with the United States as we speak. So the checks and balances are working. So let's go back into the 1960s for a second. Please have a look at this map. This is the bipolar world at its height. Everything in red, and you can see a little Cuba far away there next to the United States. Everything colored in red is the communist world. So at that point, any conflict between the two systems, between capitalism and communism, was going to become a suicide for the planet. That's why we call it MAD, mutually assured destruction. Both camps, the United States, the Western camp, Soviet Union, the socialist camp, had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world 33,000 times over and over again. And I'm not even counting chemical weapons and biological weapons stockpiles. So the international relations scholars were hectically looking for new ways of how we could peacefully coexist. And that was the new strategy developed, peaceful coexistence. The two systems do not have to necessarily go to war, but they can coexist and cooperate. 1970s gave rise to new amended versions of neorealism and neoliberalism. So neorealism or structural realism argues that power is the most important factor in international relations. I'm pretty sure all of you know Kenneth Waltz, a very popular author, and his book, Theory of International Relations. Neoliberalism at this point argued that states should be concerned with absolute, rather than relative gains to other states. So we're talking about democratic peace theory, the growth of the middle class, and interstate cooperation. Sadly, my friends, if we look at the modernity, we see the withering, not the growth of the middle class, and the withering of interstate cooperation because of the new Cold War and the restrictions imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So to some extent, the situation in the world kind of reminds that was there in Europe before the First World War, and it's very scary. However, both schools, neither liberalism nor realism, could provide adequate answers to the questions plaguing the international relations realm. And so in the 1980s and especially the 1990s, we got a new school, the school of constructivism, which argues that core aspects of international relations are socially constructed. And this school is not necessarily opposed to realism or liberalism. So this school admits or acknowledges the role of international institutions, and it also acknowledges the state of anarchy that currently exists among the nation states. To express my personal opinion, I really like the school of constructivism, but in my opinion, it also doesn't carry us all the way to the finish line, so to say. It doesn't provide us enough tools for the analysis. In other words, I'm perfectly fine with the notion that, for example, power is a socially, artificially constructed phenomenon. However, it has been around for such a long time that it will be very difficult for us and for states to decouple from the notion of power. Let me give you this example. When we discover, by we I mean the humanity, yet another tribe lost somewhere in the forests of the Amazon, and I'm talking about technologically underdeveloped communities, we still see the notion of power prevalent among these communities. It's either the Doomvirate, the power of two, where we have the leader of the tribe, the head of the tribe, and the shaman, or there is only the shaman, the spiritual world. So the concept of power is so old that it doesn't really matter any longer whether it's socially constructed or not. What matters is how we're going to deal with this concept, apply this concept, and limit big states, powerful states, in using and applying this concept. Finally, our final slide, we're going to talk about modern challenges to the international relations. Currently, we are functioning under the guise of the fourth industrial revolution, and it's going to open new horizons, but it's going to create new challenges too. So first of all, we're talking about multipolarity. The power of the West is waning. There is a new resurgent China on the rise. Russia is very resurgent too. So what kind of a transition are we going to have? If we look at the Bretton Woods system, 1944, the transition from imperial England to Republican United States was very peaceful. It was gradual State, it took about 10 years between 1944 and 1954-55 for this transition to take place. How can we organize this transition today to avoid a big war? We're functioning or operating in the environment with limited resources, growing population, there are ecological threats such as global warming. There is the digitalization of the society, which enhances terrorism. Huge migration flows worldwide, and the growth of non-state actors. So when we look at the theory of liberally welcome multinational corporations, there is a huge body of literature on multinationals, how they becoming more powerful than national governments. And what you saw during the election campaign in the United States, it doesn't matter, my friend, to him during the debates was unprecedented for the system of international relations worldwide, where multinational corporations, we're talking about the media controlled by Rupert Murdoch, didn't allow the American president to voice his doubt. The correct way to do it would have been to allow Trump, obviously, to voice his opinion and then point out his failures and educate the American people in a democratic way as to why if the multinational corporations will continue to acquire more power, because we're talking about the whole refurbishment, deconstruction, and new construction of new international relations. The rise of the far right, the rise of the far right in global politics, if you look at European countries, traditionally democratic countries, old Europe, you see the rise of far right anti-immigration, very conservative parties. It is very scary, and we see the repetition of the same trend that was there in the 1930s of the last century. The hegemon of the West, the United States, is torn apart by internal contradictions. How is the decline of the United States going to answer this question? And I already mentioned economic and ecological challenges. So we have a lot of work to do. We're talking about hammering out the new policies that are going to adequately address the challenges of the future. And before I finish, I would like to point out at one colossal failure of Western diplomacy, which occurred in the period between 1989 to maybe 1993. I'm talking about the collapse of the Soviet Union. Remember, I was talking about the Western hegemon being constantly reinvented, which allowed Europe or the West to continue its domination. In 1989, 1993, I refer to it as the golden millennial opportunity for the Western civilization. When the Soviet Union was collapsing, the West could introduce its ideas of freedom, democracy, and economic prosperity very easily into the post-Soviet space. This, unfortunately, didn't happen. We didn't learn the lesson of what happened to the Weimar Republic, and today we see the rise of authoritarian Russia. What strikes me the most is that, as far as I'm aware, no one in the West even comprehended such an opportunity, such a possibility as bringing the former post-Soviet states closer, involving them into the orbit of the Western civilization, and thus ensuring that in the future, the West, the Western Hemisphere, would sprawl from the Iberian Peninsula, which is Portugal and Spain, all the way to the Far East, to the Pacific, and then to North America, Canada, and the United States. That would have been a truly unprecedented feat. And the whole story of divided Europe was supposed to have a happy end. So once again, my friends, it's kind of our fault too, because the international relations theorists didn't write proper policies for our decision makers, arguing that that was the correct step. And now it is too late. So we're facing a completely new reality. At this, I'm going to stop because probably you're sick of hearing my voice and the Russian accent. And I'm open for your questions, maybe remarks, maybe some of you would like to cover as to what theory of international relations, in your opinion, responds the most, addresses the most the current challenges that we are facing in international relations. Thank you very much.
Okay, very highly appreciated, Professor Sheiko. It was a great discussion. So we are now open the panel discussion. I would like to start asking you, why is that the United States is taking an approach or logic with China of them or us? If you are with them, you are the enemy, or if you are with us, you can go with us and have success. So the question basically is, how is evolving the foreign policy of the past administration of Donald Trump to the Biden? There's a real change, or it's just different image and the same action, in other words?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, Axel, for your question. Speaking of China and Russia and other rising centers of multipolarity in the world, in my opinion, this is the high moment, an opportune moment for us, for the representatives of all nations in the world, to sit down and fully refurbish the existing architecture of the international relations. I'm talking about completely new model of the United Nations, first of all, more representative. So the thrust here, the vector should be toward the decreasing role of the nation state, but the increasing role of powerful international organizations that we don't have. So going back to your question, I don't really understand as to why the United States would confront Russia and China today. Now, when it comes to China, obviously America is threatened economically. When it comes to Russia, I simply don't even understand what is the issue. And in my opinion, I think this is the post-Cold War mentality. Unfortunately, that affects current Russian-American relations. So in other words, many American policymakers still see Russia as the Soviet Union, which is completely incorrect. The Soviet Union was the Soviet state which ran according to Soviet communist ideology. There is no ideology in Russia left today. So what we're having today, this development, is highly dangerous because it leads to more tension in the international relations. And you have seen, guys, usually the tension gets resolved with the use of force. This is something that we cannot afford any longer because of the weapons of mass destruction that all of the powerful countries possess. The transfer from the Trump to Biden administration, there will be a noticeable difference because America is experiencing a lot of internal problems, domestic problems. Unfortunately, in my opinion, and I hope I'm completely wrong, I think President Biden and the Biden administration will focus on the perceived external challenges, bloating them out of proportion, not to deal with domestic internal challenges. So in the future, guys, we're going to have more. We're going to have a deterioration of relations between Russia and China on the one hand, and between the United States, between the United States and China, and between the United States and Russia. Finally, I'm going to say that this is completely counterproductive for the West because it pushes Russia closer to China. And this is the last thing that we want to be doing because, first of all, it completely alters the existing system of international relations, the power centers. And secondly, Russia is still the Western civilizational byproduct. So this division between Europe and Russia and the West and the United States and Russia is completely unnatural. Anyone else, please?
Okay, thanks. We will next continue with Felipe Bravo. You can ask your question now.
Hi, Mr. Sheiko. Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Hello.
Okay. Well, my question is, I was wondering what could be like the best approach you consider useful to solve the Latin American dictatorships, like the one that is happening right now with Venezuela, and like those issues we're having with Honduras, Nicaragua, those kind of governments they're performing right now in South America.
This is a very complex issue. Thank you very much, Philippe. I'm not sure that I can answer it properly because I'm not an expert in South or Latin America. However, in my experience, Europe has gone through the same pattern, recurrent pattern of dictatorships. We're talking about Portugal, Spain, Greece, former Soviet Union. Now, even Norway had a pro-Nazi party at some point, which is difficult to believe in. So first answer is education. So we need to pour money into education. We need to build more schools. We need to build more universities. And we need to ensure that education is not a privilege. It's a right. So educated people are less likely to take the dictatorship, to accept it. Secondly, something must be done on an economic level. We have noticed that there is a trend in world history that, as a rule, quite often dictatorships arise on a poor economic soil. So, for example, Venezuela is a very rich country, rich in oil and so on and so forth. But somehow the resources are mismanaged. And you can see this pattern all over the world. The richer the country is in natural resources, quite often the poorer she is. So we're talking about corruption as a systemic challenge to national economies and to the international relations system. So we're observing the same pattern here in Russia. Unfortunately, the system is very corrupt. Please have a look at Japan. There are no natural resources. Look at the state of the economy. There is no corruption whatsoever. So it's a very interesting paradox. Now, in terms of a policy that I could offer, I don't have any because we need to sit down and work it out together. But the first two steps, which is the improvement of the remedying of the general economic environment, and then creating new educational opportunities that translate into job opportunities, is the first step.
Sorry. I got something interesting in what you said. Let me have this clear. You suggest that the more natural resources a country has, the more possibilities of being corrupted it is?
Yes. Look at Nigeria.
Okay.
She's the most corrupt country in Africa, and she's literally floating on oil. And Russia is another example. As a matter of fact, the abundance of Russian gas and oil prevents Russia from becoming a truly industrialized, digitalized nation, because Russia is applying the extensive methods of economic growth. Instead of creating know-how, new technologies, she simply pumps more oil, therefore throwing herself back into her own development. So, of course, there are exceptions. Of course, there are countries like, for example, Norway and Canada, but it's a very different historical example. Overall, countries, especially those without stable and long history of civil institutions and democratic, national democratic development, usually they're prone to having more problems because of their natural resources than otherwise.
Mr. Sheiko, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we continue next with LICGP.
Hello, Doctor. Thanks for the talk. I'd like to ask you if you could recommend me a script, text, or book that tell about how the Congress of Vienna of 1815 influence in the international relations.
What I would recommend you is to read the primary sources. So people who are the architects of the system. So you have Russian, you have Austrian diplomats such as Metternich. What did they write about this conference? How did they perceive it? Because the body of secondary literature is huge. You can pretty much Google the Congress of Vienna and read any of the research books that you're going to get as the result. The majority of them are very good. But when it comes to to conducting your own research, I would always recommend to start with primary sources. And the Congress of Vienna lasted for a very long time. We're talking about 1813 to 1815. A lot has been written by various actors, and now we have an access to it. Before it was secret. They didn't reveal it. But now we know what they were saying to their national governments. What did the Austrian ambassador, for example, say to his government? The same with the Germans, the Russians, the French. And it will help you to elucidate the picture of what was going on back then. So sorry for the that I'm not giving you the title of the book, because, as I said, pretty much all the secondary sources are good quality.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. And now we go on with a girl, Brianna Medina. You can ask.
Thank you very much. I'm Brena Medina. I'm studying international relations in Peru. So it's a pleasure to be here. I would like to ask you, how different is the study of international relations around the world?
Thank you very much, Brianna. I started studying international relations in the Soviet Union and the communism. It was a completely different approach to what I experienced when I moved to the United States, when I did my degree there. I cannot say anything about the study of this discipline, how this discipline has been studied in the East, unfortunately, because I've never had any experience with, like, let's say, Japanese textbooks on international relations. I think it depends upon what country are you going to. So, like, let's say if you're studying international relations in Sweden, you're going to have a very strong liberal theory approach about international organizations and so on and so forth. However, if you're going to go to the United States, it will depend upon who is going to be your professor and what kind of university you're going to study. Perhaps you're going to study only the use of force, and your professor is going to say, look, all of this liberalism is great, but have a look at the world. Might makes right. If you don't have a lot of armies, huge economy, and so on and so forth, you're nothing as a state entity. So that's what we're going to study. In Russia, 100%, it is the use of force. And international organizations and so on and so forth, they come somewhere far, far, far behind. So let's say if we take several different world centers, which is Russia, Western Europe, and the United States, I think that would be the difference in approaches. I'm very curious to know as to to learn what kind of approach is being practiced in South/Latin America. How do you position yourself, guys, especially having this big, gigantic neighbor up to the north that sees all of South America as its own backyard? So for me, for example, it's very difficult to comprehend the situation because I come from a different historical perspective. But also, just really quickly, I know I'm deviating a little bit, guys. When we talk about sovereignty, state sovereignty, it's very important to understand that nowadays there are only 3 countries that can exercise true state sovereignty. And there is not a single one that can do it in South America. Unfortunately, it's sad truth, but it's China, the United States of America, and the Russian Federation. So in a way, we're still living in this feudalism 2.0 where huge guys dictate their own agenda. That also impedes a proper scientific inquiry into the international relations. It impedes our knowledge, our expertise. It doesn't allow us to develop theories that might question the power of the state. So I'm really sorry I've used so many words. Is it okay as an answer? Did it work? Thank you, Brianna.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, I would like to gently suggest that if you participate, lower your hand. And also, if you're going to open your mic, you can say your name and where are you from, your city. So give the choice to Sebastián Moreno that as in the text box, he said that he would like to know if China will challenge the perspective of Latin American countries about the international relations and also reconsider the model we have actually.
Well, China isn't going to challenge anything at the moment because the Chinese strategy is very slow and creeping. So like at the moment, if anything, China is busy with Africa. Those of you guys who went to Africa, who traveled in Africa, you would see that the Chinese infrastructure projects are everywhere. I don't think it's the same in Latin America. We did see limited intervention by China in Venezuela when the United States under Trump threatened military action against Venezuela. The Chinese sent their military experts to China. The Russians did the same. So That was a limited but nevertheless intervention. As for future prospects, I think the Chinese are still very careful in confronting the United States because, as you know, according to the Monroe Doctrine, South America, Latin America is the United States backyard. So China will tread very gently. And at the moment, as I said, they develop in Africa fast as their future resource base, which should be a huge worry to all of us. Speaking about the model, at the moment, we're still looking at a semi-colonial model whereby America can intervene and influence the decision-making, whether it's Peru, Venezuela, or even Brazil, the largest and the most powerful nation in South America. Whether China is going to replace America in the future, eventually, I hope not, but only time will tell. So, unfortunately, I cannot fully answer your question because I don't have enough knowledge about the second half of the question. Thank you.
Okay, he said thank you, Sebastián Moreno. Thank you for your question. We go on with Gabriel Lozano. Please tell your name and what are you now? Thank you for your question.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Gabriel Solano and I'm from Venezuela. And I'm wondering, and the question that I would like to ask to Mr. Sheiko is, how do you think South American countries could get a more protagonist role in international relations?
Can you please repeat your question? The American Congress again? Sorry, there was a disruption.
How do you think South American countries could get a more protagonist role in international relations?
So you're talking about South American countries, right?
Yeah.
Well, probably I'm going to provide a pedestrian answer here to some extent, but I do think that the future of South America is going to revolve around the creation of some powerful regional alliance, which is, first of all, going to be the economic alliance. Why this is important? We need to group together, my friends, to produce goods and to invent goods as fast as possible. This is the notion of the so-called systemic markets. So you can see it on the example of European Union, which is something like 500 million people market at the moment. And that's why it's one of the leading places in innovation. I don't think South American, Latin American countries will be able to continue competing on the world arena in the future without creating some powerful supranational association. First of all, economic association, which will allow, first of all, for grassroots education that I have already referred to. Secondly, the economic rise across the continent in general. This will, of course, spearhead Latin American development into the future, and this will allow Latin American countries together as a concerted whole to more vocally and even aggressively, but ethically, voice their opinion in the international relations system. On your own, my friends, I don't think it will ever happen because, as I said, even Brazil on her own, the most powerful nation in South America, really doesn't have that much weight in the international arena. So how to achieve it? I don't have a recipe. I have the same idea about Africa too. Sub-Saharan Africa will have to unify into some kind of a gigantic supranational entity in order to survive the rigors of the future, the challenges of the future. And to add on, my friends, in your lifetime, you're going to see the emergence of a new union. It's not going to be the Soviet Union. It's going to be the economic union. The prototype is already here, but the center is going to be Russia and China, grouping all regional countries around them. So this is the way into the future. This is what the South American statesmen should be doing now. Dropping down the territorial boundaries, divisions, clan divisions, petty arguments, creating this powerful supranational economic foundation that will work for everyone as a trickle-down effect in the future. So like you see, also it's interesting, we're favoring realism in our discussion, but we talk about the future as the future of liberalism. It's all going to be about the international organizations that are going to be affecting our future.
Okay, I think we have the last question, so we can finish. and it is from Magali Blanco. And she said, how do you think we can control or diminish the rise of the far right? Or is it even possible? Or is it even really wanted by some nations? With everything so out of control, especially media and social media or gun control in the United States of America?
Well, I'm going to leave out the gun control in the United States, if I may, please, because it's a separate huge issue. The rise of the far right in Europe is scary, my friends. It's the repetition, as I said, of what happened before the Second World War. The drop in the living standards, rising unemployment, rising inflation, the curtailing of economic freedoms and massive migration force people to turn toward the far right agenda. And it's very unfortunate. We cannot prevent the rise of far right parties because it has already occurred. You can see that more and more votes in national parliaments across Europe are going to the far right. So we need to address this problem comprehensively, again, on several levels. First of all, as I said, it is education, but it has to be assisted by the economic evolution. We need to create more job opportunities, and we need to create more opportunities, especially for young people, to use the social ladder, the social lift. Unfortunately, currently in Europe, it doesn't really work that well as it did in the past. So what we're going to see as the eventual, I think, the eventual sliding into this some sort of a far-right quagmire. What it will produce, I'm not sure, because at the moment we cannot talk about global economic downturn, and that's when the far-right concepts usually triumph. So we might be able to kind of like balance on the edge, but escape the worst. However, as I already said, the remedy for this, to avoid the rise of the European far-right parties, is the change in rhetoric. First of all, dealing with Russia and China, but also within their own communities. And you're very correct when you pointed at the media as one of the culprits. This is the rise of multinational corporations, media corporations in particular, that I have referred to earlier. Do we need to introduce more censorship to control the media? Another huge issue. The majority of people are going to say no. However, media clearly provides a destructive role currently, inciting tension, creating anti-immigration sentiments, and so on and so forth. So, speaking of the far-right parties in Europe, I'm going to conclude by saying that I hope they will not get the critical representation. If they'll get into the parliament, into their national parliaments legally, like Hitler did in 1933, we're going to have a lot of problems on our hands. So I'm also hoping that the United States is going to preside over a peaceful transfer of power from a unipolar to a multipolar world. So we're going to avoid all of these shocks and tremors that are usually associated with the creation of a new system, like it was in 1648, like it was in 1815, and like it was in 1917, 1918, and then 1945. We simply cannot afford having another conflict. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you having me here. I have really enjoyed it. I'm really sorry if I stumbled here and there. Please accept my sincere apologies. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, no worries. We crossed a little bit of time, but it was a fantastic discussion with you, Professor. So we thank you highly for that. It was a good time for discussion and academic learning. So on behalf of the CIBEI Foundation, we thank all the participants and your questions. It was a great time to be with you, and also have kindly greeting for the people in Latin America. I know we are having some participants in different countries. So if you are interested in learning more about our projects and activities at the CIBEI Foundation, feel free to sign up in our website, fundacioncibei.com, and also follow us in the media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We host regular events like this that are open to the public. We are very, very, very kind to receive all comers. So thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheiko. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you from your way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck with your academic endeavors, my friends. I wish you luck.
Спасибо, professor.
Спасибо. Please stay safe in this dangerous world. Okay, so I'm finishing the session, right?
Yes. Okay.
Disconnect now. Okay.
We hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Just trying to figure out how to turn it off. Not very good.